Every English monarch's greatest achievement. We start with Athelstan. Athelstan was a great military leader, and so many of his victories you can make a case were his greatest achievement. I am going to go with the Battle of Brandenburg in 937. This one battle destroyed the biggest alliance against Anglo-Saxon England, and Athelstan was able to assert his control over Wessex. While I don't agree with how harsh they were, Edmund I's legal codes were by far the biggest success in his reign. The punishments were intense, but they did persuade against committing crimes. Sadly for Edmund, he was assassinated while protecting one of his servants from being robbed. Although he was too ill to participate in the battle, by far Edred's biggest achievement was the Battle of Stainmore. The Norwegian king Eric had attempted to take over Northumbria. This failed, and Eric was defeated in this battle while bringing Northumbria into England. King Edwy was a disaster and didn't have very many accomplishments. I seriously looked all over, and the best thing I could find was his land grant for expanding Abingdon Abbey. The abbey was a key part of English Benedictine reform, which revitalized Anglo-Saxon culture. Speaking of which, Edgar's accomplishment was the Benedictine reform. This partnership with the church led to an increase in literacy rates, rebuilt many of the churches throughout England, and there was a massive agricultural increase as well. It wasn't welcomed as well in the time, but in hindsight, it is a great achievement. Another difficult one to find the greatest achievement for is Edward the Martyr, albeit it isn't fully his fault, as he was surrounded by powerful people. I would say that his greatest achievement is setting the same purity of silver in his coins. This avoided debasement of the currency, which could lead to inflation and loss of public trust. Although those were never problems, his coinage reform helped prevent the problem in the future. Next up is Ethelred the Unready. Although he is one of the worst kings, it wasn't too hard to find an accomplishment for him. A legal code made under him clearly outlined what punishments would be for different crimes should be, and was also the first law code to include trial by jury. It included bits of Scandinavian legal customs which may have delayed the wars between the Scandinavian countries and England. Svein Forkbeard. There is hardly anything he did as King of England during his 40-day reign. I naturally have to just go to being able to found a dynasty that ruled over England on and off for the next 3 decades. Yeah, isn't much. Edmund Ironside. Despite losing the throne to Canute, the first battle between them went so badly for Canute that it is unmentioned in Scandinavian sources. Edmund crushed Canute's army at the Battle of Penselwood. Exact details are unknown due to the absence of said Scandinavian sources. Canute. His greatest achievement was establishing the North Sea Empire. The empire included Norway, England, and Denmark. This empire provided stability, with Canute being popular in all of the countries. It also controlled maritime trade as well as combining military forces. The empire was one of the strongest in the world at the time. Harold Harefoot. This is another monarch where there isn't much to choose from. I'm going to go with retaining the support of Leofric, the Earl of Mercia. Leofric was able to help Harold maneuver the tense political climate of the time, and without him, things may have been worse. Harthacnut. His greatest accomplishment was when he expanded the navy, doubling the number of ships from 16 to 32. Although this expansion wasn't permanent, it maintained security across the North Sea, which was critical for the time. There's no one achievement that I am going to choose as the best for Edward the Confessor. Instead, I'm going to say that his biggest achievement was managing to keep peace and stability for 24 years during a time when that was almost unheard of. Utilizing diplomacy and keeping taxes low were how he managed that. Harold Godwinson's defining moment came on September 25, 1066, when he won the Battle of Stamford Bridge against the Kingdom of Norway. This boosted English morale so much and weakened the Vikings' morale so much that the Vikings never attacked England again. William the Conqueror's greatest achievement was shaping the country. He restored ties with mainland Europe, centralized the government, conducted the first census in England, constructed castles to protect the land, and despite short-term failures, set up England to be successful in the long run. William Rufus reigned for 13 years, and most of his decisions weren't very good. However, his administrative efficiency was one of the best in the world at the time. His maximization of royal revenues was ruthless but needed. He centralized the legal system and began construction on Westminster Hall. Days after becoming king, Henry I issued the Charter of Liberties. This limited arbitrary taxation of barons, stopped the exploitation of vacant church positions, and established early protections for citizens. This made Henry extremely popular, and he had a relatively stable reign that lasted 35 years. The Charter of Liberties was the predecessor to the Magna Carta, which was signed 80 years after Henry's death. After years of civil war, King Stephen negotiated the Treaty of Wallingford. This treaty ended one of the longest civil wars on English soil by declaring that Stephen remained as king, but his rival claimant's son would be heir to the throne. Said rival claimant, Henry II's greatest achievement was the Assize of Clarendon. It established trial by jury, which had been previously declared by Ethelred the Unready but had fallen out of favor. It curbed the power of the barons, and most significantly, it ensured that accusations followed a formalized investigative process. This was another predecessor to the Magna Carta, and a lot of these decisions influenced laws for hundreds of years. Well, a lot of people would say that the Third Crusade was Richard the Lionheart's greatest achievement. I actually don't think so, as it nearly bankrupted the kingdom. I'm going to say his greatest achievement was the Treaty of Jaffa. It ended the crusade, although taxes weren't lowered. It also guaranteed the safety of Christian pilgrims and merchants visiting the holy sites in Jerusalem. When people of King John, they don't usually think of an accomplishment for him. However, the construction of Dublin Castle in 1204 was a major achievement. The castle served as a central point of governance in Ireland as a defense fortress and a place to protect the treasures of the kingdom, which John ended up losing later in his reign, and as a place where critical meetings were held. By Henry III's reign, Westminster Abbey was falling apart. However, Henry had ordered it restored. The abbey symbolized the monarchy as well as being a symbol of the country. It was a hub of government, and critical decisions were made there. Tourists came to see it, and the economy around the area boomed. Edward Longshanks is my favorite king, and he did a lot of great things. However, the first Statute of Westminster, I think, was his greatest achievement. It ensured that elections were free from force, it reduced the power of corrupt local sheriffs and officials, and set specific limits on how much somebody could be fined. The second and third statutes, which were another major achievements, were built off of this first one. During Edward II's reign, the amount of wool being exported increased. It produced nearly 230 pounds of silver, 230,000 pounds of silver each year. I apologize for that. In addition to that, thousands of jobs were created. Had he not overseen so much drama, it is likely the economy would have reached its greatest extent up to that point. Edward III was a great king, and the Battle of Crecy in 1346 is a key reason why. It showed that England was the powerhouse of Europe as well as boosting morale. One of the long-term effects of it is that Edward was also able to take over the city of Calais, which would become a significant trading hub for over 200 years. On July 18, 1389, the Truce of Loinningham was signed. This was the greatest achievement of Richard II. The truce held peace for 13 years during the 100 Years' War, where England was able to rebuild the military back to near full strength. It also allowed time for the struggling economy to improve, and it allowed Richard II to focus on domestic issues. Henry IV's life went downhill almost immediately after becoming king. Health issues and constant rebellions prevented him from achieving what he wanted. He was not a bad king, however, no one decision stands out as his greatest. So I'm going to go for something else. Respecting Parliament, even when they went against him. He accepted that Parliament wouldn't accept a tax raise, and he went to Parliament to have himself accepted as king in 1399. Henry V had several major accomplishments despite only reigning for 9 years. However, one stands out: winning the Battle of Agincourt. The odds were stacked against England. They were outnumbered 6-1. It boosted English morale when they defeated France. It also led to the Treaty of Troyes, which combined the English and French throne, although that decision would later be reversed. The opposite of his father, Henry VI had a long reign but few achievements. The most significant of the achievements was founding Eton College. Henry had founded it as a grammar school to provide free education to 70 poor scholars. The next year, he founded King's College, Cambridge, so the scholars could have higher education. Both schools are still active to this day. Edward IV's greatest achievement was stabilizing the empire during his second reign. Although the stability wouldn't last, it was crucial. The economy had stabled out, and there were no major wars. He negotiated the Treaty of Pecquigny with France. He also realized that a usurpation attempt against James III of Scotland wouldn't work, so he quickly withdrew his support. There's really not a lot to say about Edward V, and he didn't have any achievements as king. He had the potential to be a good or even great king. He was charming, intelligent, and passionate, all qualities of a good king during the medieval times. Whilst I do not consider myself a Ricardian, I do think Richard III gets somewhat of an unfair treating by history. Despite all the negatives, because there were a lot, Richard had some key achievements during his reign, which only lasted 777 days. The biggest of which was establishing what would become the Court of Requests. It was a place where people who couldn't afford legal representation applied for their grievances to be heard. This is going to sound so cliche, but Henry VII's greatest achievement was ending the Wars of the Roses. His marriage to Elizabeth of York combined the houses of York and Lancaster into the House of Tudor. While Henry VII did face rebellions, they were not as constant as before, which was a first in a long time. Henry VIII is probably the most polarizing of all the monarchs. There is a lot to say about him and his reign, from his wives to his split with the church. Amongst all of his reign, by far, his greatest achievement was founding the Royal Navy. The previous navy was a temporary fleet of merchant vessels. Henry's navy had over 50 warships, and he founded multiple permanent dockyards. And he founded what would become the Navy Board to oversee said navy. Just 11 days before his death, Edward VI issued the Royal Charter for Christ's Hospital, Bridewell Hospital, and St. Thomas's Hospital. They were a safe place for orphaned and seriously ill children to receive a proper education. 2 of the hospitals are still active today, albeit for a different use. Mary I was not a good queen, however her frugality prevented the inflation crisis from getting worse. She restored and expanded the exchequer system, increasing efficiency in revenue collection. I do believe if she had reigned longer, the economy would have turned out really well. However, she did only reign for 5 years. On August 8, 1588, Elizabeth I's Royal Navy crushed the Spanish Armada. The Armada were sent to invade by Philip II of Spain. However, despite being outnumbered, the English ships were faster and easier to control. The Battle of Gravelines solidified England's navy as one of Europe's strongest. James I kept England largely out of the 30 Years' War, which was critical, as another costly war would have completely destroyed England and would have caused tons of unnecessary chaos. In 1628, King Charles I approved the Petition of Right despite his hesitancy. It ended arbitrary taxation, ensured martial law would not be declared during peacetime, made it illegal to imprison somebody without cause, and made it where private citizens no longer had to provide shelter for soldiers. Adding on to what his father did, Charles II approved the passage of the Habeas Corpus Act. This prevented illegal imprisonment by the Crown and outlawed sending prisoners overseas to evade the courts, and it reinforced the law that detainees be brought before a judge. While I do not agree with how he did it, and it did backfire on him, James II's greatest achievement as king was that he genuinely tried to enact a policy of religious tolerance. It led to his deposition, and what he did manage to do was repealed almost right away. William III and Mary II are the only co-rulers in English history. Their greatest achievement was the Bill of Rights, which limited the power of the monarchy and increased the power of Parliament. It also declared that the monarchy cannot be involved in elections for Parliament, and it granted citizens individual rights as well. In 1707, Queen Anne combined the Kingdom of England with the Kingdom of Scotland. It unified two kingdoms, established a free trade zone, prevented geopolitical conflict, and lifted economic sanctions. Now this is where I was going to end my video, as the future ones are not technically English but British. However, after thinking about it, I decided that I would include the ones post-Acts of Union. George I's greatest achievement was creating the office of Prime Minister in 1721. It stopped the South Sea Bubble scandal from ending with George deposed. The position of Prime Minister has grown into a significant role, and this forgotten, unpopular king started the whole thing. The most recent monarch to lead troops into battle was George II at the Battle of Dettingen. It prevented a possible military disaster and boosted morale for English troops. George III's greatest achievement was Britain's victory over France during the Napoleonic Wars, albeit his son was regent during most of this time. By backing military campaigns and forming key alliances, England cemented their naval supremacy and successfully preserved the empire against Napoleon. George IV had few accomplishments and was a disaster of a king. What I'm going to go with is redesigning London's layout to what it is today. He developed Regent's Park, transformed Buckingham House into a grand palace, and restored Windsor Castle. William IV had several reforms passed under him, but none of that was really him doing the work. However, he absolutely did what he could to survive long enough that Queen Victoria was never under a regency led by Victoria's mother, who William despised. Queen Victoria's greatest achievement was transforming the monarchy to be firmly constitutional. The last bits of serious power were removed during her reign, some with and some without her approval. This grew the position of Prime Minister, who is indirectly elected by the citizens of the country. Using his personal charm, Edward VII was able to form an alliance with France. The Entente Cordiale of 1904 likely prevented future wars with France, and the UK secured vital global trade routes and built a strategic alliance against several growing powers. George V brought the monarchy to the public. By changing the name of the royal house from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor, he showed that he understood how the public felt about a German-sounding house name. He connected through radio and was the first monarch to give Christmas broadcasts. While touring low-income areas of the country, Edward VIII declared that something had to be done to help the unemployed miners. He also attempted to create paid jobs in the steel industry. None of this ever amounted to anything. However, it is clear he supported the working class, much to the annoyance of the government led by Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin. George VI boosted public morale during World War II. He visited troops, gave speeches, and refused to leave London during the Blitz. He was subject to the same rations as the common people. He strengthened the alliance between the United Kingdom and United States and instituted the George Cross and George Medal to honor civilian courage. Elizabeth II brought the monarchy into the modern age. By changing with the times, Elizabeth brought the monarchy closer to the people than ever before. She had the royal family on social media. She successfully remained neutral on political matters, although she did support the Crown Act and traveled around the world as a diplomat. Charles III's greatest achievement so far is his efforts to bring people together. While the world was fighting, Charles has actively fought for peace, while at the same time recognizing that countries need to be prepared. His coronation was the most inclusive in history, and he has supported diversity. Thank you all so much for watching this video. It has been a lot of fun to research and a lot of fun to make. And if you enjoyed it, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe.